My name is Jonathan and welcome to Software Design from the Beginning. Right, episode 1 we discussed the box, episode 2 the line. Now it's time to kind of bring them together in a little bit more abstract thought. So what I'm going to do is get rid of all of this on our board, and I'm going to start again. Let's go and just get rid of all of this, and we're going to start thinking about abstract design. Right, so here we have a box. Let's put the box down. I'm going to draw it elongated. I'm going to draw it as a rectangle. I'm going to stretch it all the way around. As I do this, it gives you a sense of what it might be, right? Because it's pulled wide. What do you think that might be? It's width, right? So design width. If I'm thinking width, if I draw something like that, it's quite tall. If I draw something like that, it's wide. Words that we think of when we draw something wide is a layer, or a foundation, a platform, and so on. So what we're really saying is that it's the foundation or the infrastructure or something that something else builds on top of. So if I build something like that, you will instinctively, with only a year or so into software, perhaps even less than that, understand what this would be. I mean, you're going to see things like this drawn all the time, and this is a form of the box. But what is it doing? Well, it's suggesting as soon as it gets elongated like that, intuitively we just think, oh, foundation, and therefore it must be an architectural diagram. Right? I mean, this is baked into, I think, into many of our kind of ways of thinking already. Everybody goes to this kind of level of understanding, perhaps intuitively. Perhaps you didn't think too much about it, but there it is. I could do this and say, well, this is the CPU. I might come in here and I say this is hex, you know, and I can draw layers, and this really is the fundamental way of illustrating an abstraction, right? Or what we can call layers of abstraction. So what does that mean for us when we're designing and when we're doing things? Well, fundamentally, and it's quite neglected, I feel, fundamentally we should be building layers upon layers on where we're going, right? So we're starting at this point and we're ending up somewhere over here. And what that is might be something like MVC. Let's say you're building a web app or a desktop application, and you know, you've heard of MVC, and you might even have a technology called MVC, and there it is, and you build on it. Well, what's underneath that? Well, if we go deeper, we might say, well, underneath MVC is some kind of pipeline. Where does that pipeline come from? Well, the pipeline is built into a web server, for example. Well, what does the web server do? Well, the web server is a listener, and it's listening for messages, and the messages are HTTP. So you might say that this is a message, not really a platform, that the message comes into the web server, goes through the pipeline, ends up on your MVC. Well, what's happening now? Well, from our MVC, you're now doing your own thing. This is your domain. So let's just change color here, right, just to represent that it's your thing. And you know, this is the platform that you're building on. And the HTTP message comes through. Well, what have you got here? Well, you might have a controller. This is your controller, and you might have some kind of data layer, right? You might have some kind of business layer. Right? These are common terms for layered architecture in, well, it's pretty common. It's pretty common. So what we might do is say, well, here's a controller. Controller talks to our business layer, which talks to our data layer. Right? It might be something like that. Well, how do you relate this kind of diagram in boxes? How do you relate this to the cat, for example? Right? There's the cat. Let's draw that as another object. So the cat there is an object. So in an MVC, what it resides this to, or resigns it to, is a model. So this concept of a model view controller, this would be, let's say, representative of a model. We'll get into complications of this later on, but really ultimately for now we're going to say, well, look, the HTTP message comes through. There's the message, and I'm going to draw this as green to represent things that are not in our control. Okay, so these things here are part of the platform that we are building on. And the HTTP message comes through and it lands in our controller, and the controller has to understand the cat, and there is some kind of logic and process and flow, and there comes the cat. Right. Now, in different paradigms, right, software design, software paradigms like object-oriented or functional programming or service-oriented, that kind of thing, component-based architecture and so on, the way that we look at a cat would differ. Right? How, what we reason about this cat and where it lives in the database, or how it's stored in memory, or how it's located and how it's delivered, we might subtly, with various kinds of attitudes and modern ways of thinking, reason about this differently. Right? So some might say, well, the only way to describe this should be by using some kind of relationship here, and saying, I don't want to do UML, right? I just want to do that. Not that an arrow is UML, it's just that it might be confusing. So here I have a line, and this line is a relationship. And how do we express this relationship? Well, in code we might express it as inheritance, or something of that nature, or with an interface or something like that. But ultimately, from an MVC standpoint, all it really wants is a model that it then gives and provides to a view. And this kind of understanding of cat and animal in terms of interfaces or classes, or how we reason about that data, is really the connection between the cat as a domain languaged object. Meaning, let's do this differently. So if the blue represents the domain, right? If you got the domain experts in a room and you put them all together and you came up with a domain model of their industry, they are not thinking of inheritance, they are not thinking of composition, they are not thinking in object-oriented terms or service-oriented API. It's a different type of thing. That's an abstract concept. What they're talking about is the relationship between the cat and the vehicle and transport and process. So really, they're going to be talking in a different type of language, and perhaps, these lines mean something entirely different to them. And this is an age-old kind of scenario here. How do you kind of map these two things? How do you map the design that they are giving you from a domain standpoint into what you would consider a design in a technical domain standpoint? And so, they can be the same thing in a sense. They can relate to each other. One person could reason about both these sides and do it, but as you get in larger domains with a lot more technicalities and complexities, you're going to have professionals doing this, and you're going to have to translate it somehow into something like that. So this is an abstract concept. So just to review this, just to be clear, what I'm saying is that the box also represents architectural type of things, something like a layer. If you think in layers and you think in technical terms here, this is a much, this is a different kind of level of thinking than this. And this is a different level of thinking than that. There are 3 steps here. In fact, if we went further and said that our architecture, this is a very, very basic form of architecture. What we actually would like is something else. We would like some kind of API over here, and perhaps it is shared and the controller talks to an API. Perhaps the model viewer controller, the actual view that sits there, perhaps talks to the API itself. Let me do that, create a view. You can see how complicated this could get, right? Because now we have these layers talking to layers, and there is a generalization of layers. But there is also the concept of generalization of our objects. Okay, and I find that this is often some kind of stumbling block, or perhaps, to be fair, I should say, people don't really reason about the three. They tend to reason about the one and then try and shove it into something that they've already got here. So architecture and good design, from my point of view, would be to understand very clearly what these three things are actually about, what they are requiring, and have a decent connection, a decent generalization, having a form of understanding of all three that is very cohesive. We then try and simplify. We have constraints now and technical capabilities as well as business capabilities to fulfill. So lastly, I'll point that out, and then we will go to the next episode and talk about checklists. Right, so just to point out the last thing here is that when we're talking about business capability, we're talking about how quickly can we transport the animal to the destination, how safely can we conduct that exercise, how transparent can we have it. The customer requires openness and transparency. They love their cat, right? There is a relationship between the customer here. It's very, very strong. And the business is looking for profit. It's looking for smoothness. It's looking for openness and transparency, perhaps, and efficiency and things of that nature. And here you are thinking about interfaces, class hierarchies, and thinking about how to deliver it to a view or a page on a website. This is an entirely different way of thinking. In fact, even at this level, you're thinking about 3-4 different layers at least, but there are more layers. So I want to stop there. Business capability, business understanding, models, layers of abstraction, architectures. We're going to get more into this again later. This was a summary of some of the more abstract ways of thinking of the box and the line. Please join me for the next episode. As usual, if you like this video, please consider pressing the like button and, of course, subscribing. If you press the bell, you will get notified of the next video when it comes out. And, of course, please recommend it to anyone that you feel might benefit from this video series. Once again, thank you for watching.